Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of the Daily Friend Show. I'm your host, Nicholas Lorimer, today joined by Hermann Pretorius. Apologies, Hermann's sound will be a little bit echoey today. He's moving into a new office, and things are not quite correctly affiliated for sound. But anyway, we shall endure. And the first story, of course, we're going to talk about, I think, is probably our final word for now on the DA's leadership race. Well, there was a lot of speculation about what this leadership race was going to look like, but I think now we have a much better idea with John Steenhuisen announcing that he will not seek another term as DA leader. So the suspicion amongst most seems to be that Jordan Hill-Lewis is very likely to be the next leader of the DA, that he is at least in first place, although we don't know entirely yet who his competition might be for that position. And I'm sure someone will challenge, especially when it's an open seat. So there's some discussion in the media about how Jordan Hill-Lewis has said that he is strongly considering contesting the party leadership, but he would want to remain the mayor of Cape Town. There are some people in the DA who think this is a good idea because it would keep him a bit separate from national government, which would be useful for preventing what some believe was Steenhuisen getting too close to the ANC. That was, whether that was true or not, was certainly a perception amongst many voters. And I can always see whenever we talk about the DA, someone will mention it, for example, in the comments section. So, Herman, you're quite clued up on these sort of things. What's your take on this? Is the conventional wisdom that Jordan Hill-Lewis is the front runner correct? Who might oppose him? And what do you think about this Jordan Hill-Lewis as a potential future leader of the DA?
Yeah, I think the conventional wisdom in this sense is broadly accurate. I definitely think this is Jordan Hill-Lewis's election to lose. Interestingly, as far as I understand, the DA's rules regarding contestation of these types of positions prohibit someone from expressing publicly an interest in standing for a position until the nomination period for such has opened, which will only happen, I think, in a month's time at the start of March. So
the official election campaign is not very long, right? Because their conference is in April, I think. So
yes.
It'll be like just over a month's worth of campaigning.
Yes, so you'll have this sort of shadow campaign going in the meantime, and it might be frustrating for many people who feel, just come out and say you want it. Well, there are party rules here that are getting in the way. Not just conventions like with the ANC, where it used to be the convention that you don't campaign for the leadership. You almost need to passively accept the leadership thrust upon you by the noble delegates of the African National Congress. That sort of went out the window starting in 2012, but then it was well out the window and defenestrated by 2017 when open campaigning was taking place. But in the DA, it's slightly different. It is a codified rule that you are prohibited of expressing such public interest. So if people feel that Jordan Hill-Lewis might be a bit cagey about whether he will stand or not, that's probably the reason. But from what I can hear from speaking to people on the ground, it is pretty clear that he is running. And there seems to be a question about whether he will stand uncontested, whether it will be an effective coronation. There are rumors of people trying their luck and setting up shop to challenge for the DA leadership, especially, as you say, because it is a vacancy rather than an incumbency. And then there's, of course, the question, with the headline that of the news story we're discussing sort of as a hook for the entire angle, as to whether he will remain mayor of Cape Town, whether he might move to the provincial legislature or even to Parliament. Parliament, if he moves, Parliament would be more likely. But from what Hill-Lewis has said to his own caucus in the city council chamber, and from what I can pick up, the decision hasn't firmly been made yet. Will he stay as mayor or will he go? But it does seem to favor. He does seem to favor staying on in the position as Cape Town mayor, and I think there are quite a few advantages to that, which we could, perhaps unpack a bit if there's interest in it. But yeah, that's my take: is that the current received wisdom of this is Hill Lewis's race to lose certainly seems to me to be the case.
Yeah, so on that point, I mean, obviously there's precedent for this. Helen Zille was famously the leader of the DA, I think, through her time as mayor and also as premier of the Western Cape. And I think so. It's obvious that someone can do the job, although the DA is a larger party in many ways than it was back then. So I mean, it is a more demanding position. Although, on the other hand, being in local government when you're about to face a local government election, I think does help your mayor kind of have more credibility and, be able to hone his campaigning a bit. He's used to local government campaigning. At the same time, it does mean that he's going to be, running around the country speaking at events rather than perhaps focusing on Cape Town, which I'm pretty sure the DA will maintain its majority, but, the Patriotic Alliance has been succeeding in some by-elections in the Western Cape, doing quite well. So, it's not a completely foregone conclusion. I think that the DA will 120 million% ensure their dominance in Cape Town. So, I don't know. Do you want your leader distracted? What's your take on those thoughts?
I think your point about the credibility of having a mayor lead the party in a local government election is a strong one, especially if the DA is going to use Cyril Ramaphosa's words of, there's at least one city in South Africa that works, that shows it is functional, and that is Cape Town. I mean, Jordan and Lewis could just say, look, I'm the mayor of that city, and we can do that elsewhere. But I think a particularly strong messaging angle that would come through for the DA from having Hill Lewis as sort of national federal leader is this idea of what can be accomplished with or without a majority. Because for the last 10 years, since 2016, there have been DA mayors in Tshwane, in Johannesburg, in Ekurhuleni, but there haven't been DA majorities. And speaking to people in the campaign and just listening to what's coming out from the various campaigns, it is clear that the push for the importance of a DA majority is very front of mind in the contestable metros of Joburg, Tshwane, Ekurhuleni, and Nelson Mandela Bay municipality, less so, in Mangaung or eThekwini. But where it has once gone from, in 2009, deny the ANC a two-thirds majority, it is now sort of, it then swung towards get the DA into government. And now it's that argument is honing itself to give the DA a majority where it can govern. And Hill Lewis will be a very potent messenger of that. He could just point to his successes and say, Cape Town could do this because we had a majority. Cape Town could do that because we had a majority. The difference between a DA mayor and a DA mayor backed by a majority is worlds apart, and I can show you that difference. So from that perspective, I think he adds significant weight to the DA's overall message. However, as you say, there are some concerns about the party not being, this isn't 2006, we ain't in Kansas anymore. It's 20 years on. So the question of whether a party will be able to be governed nationally or led nationally by such a very specific local figure is a different question. Of course, into that comes in the question of who will then lead the DA in Parliament. It is my understanding that the DA leader is automatically a member of all DA caucuses. So Jordan Lewis, while he won't be a member of Parliament if he chooses to stay mayor, he will still be considered by the party as a member of the parliamentary caucus. So he could, even from that perspective, make sure that he influences the parliamentary approach to the GNU and cabinet government from that perspective. Right. So yeah, pros and cons, but on the main, I think more pros than cons for Lewis winning and then remaining mayor in this local government election campaign.
So just on the DA in Cape Town, if you look at the 2016 local government election, the DA got about 2/3 in Cape Town, 66.8%. Then in the 2021 local government election, this goes down to, I think, about 58%. And now national elections, you can't directly compare them because turnout is different, people vote differently, etc. But the DA got about sort of 53% in Cape Town. So I wouldn't be surprised if they get, like, I guess, somewhere around 55%, 54% in this election. But that is still something I think they would want to be worried about to keep an eye on as the party strategist. But I think we'll get more into that later on our third story. Let's move on to our next one. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Just one last thing on this is Jordan and Lewis being both the DA's mayoral candidate in Cape Town and federal leader does open up the possibility of Cape Town seeing an absolute avalanche of opposition resources, because it would be sweet for the DA's opponents to deny the DA federal leader the mayoralty he had been holding prior, the mayoralty he would be the incumbent of. So there might very well be opening up a new front in the local government elections, with one front being very much Johannesburg, and the new front might be Cape Town, where the front in Johannesburg is sort of the DA's offensive front, get Zille in there, she's the heaviest hitter in the ring, most experience, most fundraising ability, sort of that's the offensive. But then the defensive front of Protect Hill Lewis might also become a sort of a burning point in this election campaign that might otherwise have been still the case, but to a lesser intensity. So it can shake up where the various parties decide to deploy their resources.
And I think Cape Town will be interesting because they're the DA's main opponents will be, I suspect, the Patriotic Alliance, the National Coloured Congress, and the Freedom Front Plus, probably, and maybe also the ACDP, which is, of course, quite a different terrain from the rest of the country, where it's, ANC, MK, Action SA, those parties. Anyway, okay, let's move on to our next story. The State of the Nation is coming up soon with the opening of Parliament, and this is once again quite important for government. Government takes its lead in many ways from things said in the State of the Nation address by President Cyril Ramaphosa. An interesting position. I think Cyril Ramaphosa is the weakest he's ever been, so it's going to be interesting to see if that affects his speech at all. I suspect it probably won't, considering he doesn't seem to really adapt at all to the times. But one of the things that we, as in the Institute of Race Relations, are calling for is that there be a new focus on procurement and value for money in the State of the Nation and the following budget. Hermann, do you want to take us through a little bit about what the value for money bill is and why we think the president should embrace it?
So, over the last 2 years, the Institute has published an annual series of 8 papers called The Blueprint for Growth. And it has been acclaimed as truly solid work. And it has sort of become our flagship publication, the how-to guide to get South Africa's economic engine firing on all cylinders, making sure that we've got the capacity, the resources, and the upward social mobility to solve the many problems we face as a country. And the one paper in this annual series is on fiscal management and public finances. And our colleague and head of IRR Legal, Gabriel Krause, has done remarkable work on how much money the government spends every year on public procurement and what percentage or chunk of that money is not spent on a value for money basis, on an effective basis, on a getting as much as you can basis. But actually, built into the procurement system are these BEE premiums, markups that the taxpayer overpays for the delivery of services and goods, simply because the onus or the pressure from government is there that BEE beneficiaries and BEE listed companies get the benefit of this overspending. So what is remarkable is that between 100 and 150 billion rand every year can be saved if the government decided to go value for money based in public procurement rather than transformational political agendas. That is enough to drop taxes from value added tax from 15% to 11.5%, meaning all South Africans can experience tax relief. That is the scale of numbers we're talking about here. This isn't austerity in the sense of cutting back government services and sort of withdrawing support where the state was providing support. This is just optimizing the revenue that the government already has to make sure that instead of township development or schools development or road building, whatever the case may be, becomes the terrain for tenderpreneurs to really enrich themselves, instead of going for sort of the BEE based empowerment fake transformation route, the government can just say, when people tender for public procurement contracts, the tenderer that can give the best value for money will get the contract. Now, of course, the underlying problem here is that if the government chooses not to go for value for money, it is choosing to go for something else. And that something else is a maintenance of BEE, empowerment, sort of procurement favoritism dressed up as empowerment policy, to ensure that the connected cronies, comrades, and cadres can remain connected, can remain, in the flush of money at the expense of service delivery and those who depend most on those services, the poorest South Africans. And the heart of this value for money narrative that we are now sort of doubling down on is that Gabriel drafted a piece of law that, if passed, will ensure public procurement happens on a value for money basis. That bill could save South Africans 100 to 150 billion rand a year. Now, we can look at value for money to have at least 5 immediate benefits. It means fighting corruption as per the Zondo Commission recommendations, because you don't have this premium layer of fat with which to sort of leverage and curry favor and build negative incentives into public procurement. So it fights corruption. It ensures better service delivery, because instead of money going to the pockets of the well-connected, that money could go to providing either higher quality services or more services. So quantitatively or qualitatively, you get this improvement in service delivery. Number 3, it can lower taxes. As I've said, that is enough. The savings from cutting BEE premiums and going for value for money is enough to drop VAT from 15% to 11.5%. That is money into the pockets of ordinary South Africans immediately.
Yeah, everyone gets 4% more spending money, basically.
Every wage, check, salary payslip becomes more valuable immediately without taking a cent away from frontline spending. And then once you have that effect of less corruption, better service delivery, lower taxes, that floods into higher growth, because your consumer is now in a healthier state. They have more money to spend or more money to save, and that drives job creation. So it's these 5 things that we're really urging President Ramaphosa to consider. To say that this isn't austerity, this isn't cutting back and sort of letting the poor rot, social Darwinism, I'm not paying taxes for the poor to sort of I don't know, get a handout. This is nothing to do with that. This is just saying, do we believe that South Africans deserve the optimization of service delivery spending and public procurement? Yes, if we do, we can fight corruption, we can improve service delivery, we can lower taxes for everyone, we can ensure economic growth and job creation. The argument is, I mean, it's sort of like almost like a slam dunk, and that is why we are now urging President Ramaphosa to commit his government to the value for money bill, the law that Gabriel Krause has written, which is an excellent piece of legislative drafting. And that's going to be a heart of one of our campaigns this year under our What South Africa Can Be, What SA Can Be initiative. It is to get to 201 parliamentary votes. We already have one. We've met with one MP. We've got further meetings lined up. So one down, 200 more to go. But we are going to try and build that majority for value for money, not because it's in the interest of this or that group, but because we all want to see corruption getting a bloody nose. We all want to see better service delivery. We all want to see lower taxes. We all want to see a growing economy and more jobs. And value for money is the way to do that. And that's why the IRR CEO, Dr. John Endres, wrote that letter to Ramaphosa. And we are now eagerly awaiting a response. And we've got some extra actions in the chamber. If the president fobs us off, which is very likely, we won't leave it there. We've got some additional plans to turn up the volume.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because it is also ultimately in the governance interest of President Ramaphosa, right? No doubt, the State of the Nation, he will announce the spending of vast sums of money on this and that project and this and that infrastructure, this and that here and there. But all of those ring hollow because you know the graft, the waste, the corruption that's going to go into every single procurement decision made to enact those things. That will result in them either being badly done or not being done or being less done than they could otherwise have been. And I think that's exactly why value for money is just so important a reform.
And if we want, yeah, it is so common sense. It's really difficult to argue against, and good luck to anyone who's going to try. But if South Africans and people want an example of where value for money was sort of the absence of it was astonishing, you can just think Tembisa Hospital. That was a perfect example of where a government entity had a budget that it should spend on making sick people better. What did it spend it on? Not one blue Lamborghini, not two blue Lamborghinis, but I think, 3 blue Lamborghinis? Now, tell me with a straight face, President Ramaphosa, that that's value for money. That's the difference we're trying to make here. We're not saying we're tinkering along the margins. We're saying, do you want Tembisa Hospital? Or do you think, do you want Tembisa Hospital to have Lamborghinis or healthy patients? That's the value for money, Joe.
I don't know, maybe if they let the patients take a ride in the Lamborghini, it will make up for them not getting the treatment. But anyway.
Yeah, it's sort of an interesting spin on homeopathy. It's sort of something else that wouldn't work, but, it gets the blood going, I guess.
Yeah, it'll look kind of cool. Okay, let's go back to politics. By-elections. There have been some by-elections recently. There were some which the DA did not do so well in. I think they kept a ward in Pretoria, but the Supreme Front came surprisingly close. I think they lost another one somewhere in the rural Western Cape to the Patriotic Alliance. I may be misremembering that, but that's what I think. But then we also had this week 2 successes for the DA, which were quite interesting, also in the rural Western Cape. So in the Cape Winelands, Ward 4, which is in Langburg municipality, this is an ANC ward. It's been an ANC ward forever, Ward 4. Just looking at the results, going all the way back to sort of 2011, when the ANC was already beginning to fall apart. It still just beat the DA in this ward, getting about 43% of the vote. In the last local government election, in the last national election, the ANC gets 33% in this ward. So they just had a by-election. because the ANC councillor, I think, defected to the DA. And the DA wins the ward by 40% of the ANC's 37%. The Patriotic Alliance coming in third place with 23% of the vote. So the ANC vote quite a bit down from where they were. The DA up quite a bit, and the Patriotic Alliance up slightly. Also in Cedarburg, which has been a very fiercely contested place, I think the DA lost a lot of ground in that municipality to a local group called Cedarburg First, Cedarburg Eerste, I think was their name, which they seem to have been clawing back now. The DA won Ward 4 in Cedarburg with 35% of the vote, narrowly beating the Patriotic Alliance, who got 29% of the vote. That's almost double from the DA's last total in that ward. The ANC came in third with 22% of the vote, down from 31%. The National Coloured Congress getting 7%, and Cedarburg First, who previously got about a quarter of the vote in that ward, down to 2%. So it looks like they are falling off a bit. Interesting stuff here. And the rural Western Cape is kind of a slightly weird place in our politics. I think it doesn't fall into any of the kind of stereotypes. The ANC has, I think, been quite traditionally strong here, even until quite recently. But you've also had some of these other much smaller independent parties. The Patriotic Alliance, of course, has done quite well in some of these municipalities. You've also had other weird small parties, like I think COSA in the one municipality. This does, however, to me, so you can look at these by-elections, you can say, okay, the DA's done well in some of these, the PA's done well in some of these. What does this really mean? But I think the thing that seems to be the through line in all of them is that the ANC is not doing well in these municipalities. What's your take on that?
Yeah, no, I agree, and the DA is certainly feeling the pressure from the Freedom Front Plus and from the Patriotic Alliance, eking that Tshwane ward, I think it was Ward 57, by 200 odd votes, where the DA councillor, I think, died. That was down to just good old graft work on the campaign. I spoke to one of the local councillors who was the running mate in the ward, and according to her, the difference between winning and losing that ward was essentially a constant visibility in one very specific voting district regarding a particular power station that was giving problems over a sustained period that overlapped with the election campaign. And it just goes to show how the DA might genuinely be in the best state it has ever been in terms of polling. In the SRF polling at the end of last year, they were polling at 32%, with the ANC at 37%, 5% gap between the two, or 5-point gap between the two, in a poll with a margin of error of 4. So that's quite neck and neck. At the beginning of last year, we found them essentially tied on 30% of these two parties. So the DA is in a good state in terms of its electoral performance, if you look at the polling. That seems to be borne out by the by-elections over the last year, 2 years, where in about 60% of by-elections, the DA has grown its support, where the ANC that has the sort of inverse of that, in about 60% of by-elections, the ANC lost support. And with the DA being in a strong position, but with the Freedom Front Plus applying pressure in the north and the Patriotic Alliance applying pressure in the Western Cape, the DA certainly isn't taking anything for granted in this upcoming election. And what I find fascinating about the Winelands by-election is, if you look at the turnout, in 2021, that turnout was 60%. And in this by-election, that turnout was 55%. So that's pretty decent turnout. That's probably the type of turnout we can expect.
Unusual for a by-election. You know, in by-elections, you quite often see sometimes the turnout can halve. Even sometimes you can get turnout like 30%.
Yes, or even I've seen lower. I've seen sort of 20% turnout for by-elections, and then they aren't useful to understand the picture. But in the Winelands Ward 4, the Bonnevale Happy Valley in Langeberg, this is quite a good dress rehearsal. And what should worry the PA there is that they essentially remain stagnant from 21% to 23%. That's not a move, where the DA went from 28 to 40 and the ANC from 47 to 37. Now, as you pointed out, the councillor shifted political allegiance from the ANC to the DA and kept the ward. What does that tell us? That by-elections, local government elections, are often intensely local. That if the DA wants to understand what was it that made them successful in this ward, it was that the local councillor representative candidate person was credible, and that they could take a personal vote from the ANC over to the DA. So the DA kept its party vote and added the personal vote of the councillor, where the ANC likely did the reverse. So when we look at that first topic of, where should Jordan Lewis be, mayor or not mayor, the only thing I would take away from these by-elections, if I were a DA or an ANC strategist, is that the value of a local candidate of credibility and quality cannot be overstated. Here, in key data points, we see the difference that made. Patriotic Alliance, stable. The ANC and DA flipped. That is why, when you go to vote, don't just think you're electing a local ward councillor. This is bigger than that. You are electing the person you think will take your call at 7 o'clock at night or 11 o'clock at night. I'm not saying doing that, please. Some ward councillors are probably the most tortured and abused people in the country. But it just goes to show to the parties that this isn't parachuting games. If you're going to be a ward contester, have a footprint in that ward. It makes all the difference.
Yeah, and I think that's also going to be a defining sort of these much smaller, more complicated local battles on a sort of municipality by municipality basis is really going to play out across the whole of the rural Western Cape, where I think in the last national election, if you look at the municipalities, I think the DA was the largest party in pretty much all of those municipalities. Now, that often means, that they got a third of the votes, and then the next party got like 25% of the vote, which is usually the ANC. But this is yet another sign, I think, that, this was like an area of the country that the ANC had diminished in, but it was still sort of holding on, and even able to hold on in some of these municipalities, because it could form coalitions like the Patriotic Alliance or whatever. I suspect this local government election is going to reduce the ANC in many of these places to being not necessarily the leader of a coalition against a DA, but rather maybe even second place in some of these places, forming a coalition with the Patriotic Alliance, or sometimes even locked out of government entirely. It's going to be very interesting to watch that.
And a last point on I think the ANC's weakness into this election campaign is that this is a party that really has run out of human capital. And that's the problem with a sinking ship, is if you have cunning rats, they get onto
no one wants to get on board.
No one wants to get on board. So if you are an ambitious sort of local activist and you think, I want to get involved in politics, the ANC is no longer that vehicle in many wards. Wards that used to be safe ANC homeland territory, where they could be at home, and you can read Helen Zille's memoir about how even the police were like, "Why are you trying to campaign here? This is an ANC ward. This is where the ANC's home." So the fact is that the ANC has a human capital problem, not just from having sort of drained itself through cadre deployment. Instead of getting skills from society to the party, it went reverse, with the party it delegating whatever skills it had to sort of positions across society. But it is now running into the very real risk that political ambition, no longer is associated with the ANC, because it's no longer the party to local activism or leadership. And that's a real worry, because that has been the brand for the ANC for 50, 60 years.
Yeah, it's going to be very interesting to watch a whole bunch of the ward elections around the country, because if you look at the last national election results, the ANC has started in a whole bunch of wards, even where it's sort of clearly the favorite, has started to drop now below 50% of the vote. So you're going to see probably some obscure ward in what used to be ANC territory going to the EFF, or going to some independent party, or there'll be a township ward that goes, I don't know, to Action SA or something,
or MK.
There'll be, or MK, right? And this little sort of chipping away at things, I think, is only going to accelerate the party's crisis. It's going to be very fascinating to watch on election day, and I actually almost can't wait for it. I hope it is sooner rather than later. I hope it's November 1st. That would suit me. But anyway, with that, we've gone a bit long, so thank you very much for listening. Apologies for some of the echo on Hermann's side, but I'm sure that will be resolved next time he's on. And otherwise, I hope you all have a wonderful day. We shall see you tomorrow for the live show at 1:30. Cheers, everyone. Have a great time. The Daily Friend Show and The Daily Friend are a project of the Institute of Race Relations, the IRR. The IRR is a think tank which was founded in 1929 to study race relations in South Africa and works to change government policy to improve race relations through non-racialism and to ensure the prosperity of all South Africans. If you like our work and would like to support us, please go to irr.org.za and click Support the IRR. Or you can go to thedailyfriend.co.za and click the Fund Us button.